Hey YouTube, I've gotten a lot of requests over the years to do a video on making bass lines, how I make bass lines. And I think that most of those people asking me that are actually asking how I make acid lead lines, which are usually played on instruments that call themselves bass lines. So I can understand the confusion. But to cover both bases, I've got ReBirth open, and I'm going to show you how I make a bass line as well as a lead line. And I'll jump right in here. I'd like to start off with a bass. So I'm going to use the second 203 here to do that, and I've just got a bunch of C's in there right now. I'll start off by shaping the cutoff and resonance, so we don't need that much resonance on this. And just a little bit of decay. So one thing that I really like to do is drop off the first note on each of the 4 beats in a 16 note pattern. So I'm putting in a rest on the 1, the 5, the 9, and the 13. And what that's doing is it's going to give it room to throw in the kick in here without using a sidechain compressor, which, although this does have a compressor, I'm not going to be using that because it doesn't really have the sidechain. At least I don't think it does. I'm not exactly sure how the compressor works in here. I don't like compressors. So when I now throw in a 4 on the floor pattern, which is very typical, first let me throw in some accents so that you're actually going to hear this. You hear how the bass is cutting out right there so the kick can punch through. And that's like exactly where I start almost everything. You can play around with it from there in a multitude of ways. In fact, let me do that. I'm going to play around with the middle section of, I'm thinking of the whole bar in sections of 4. So in the second beat, I'm going to play around with it a little bit and throw in just a little variation, throwing it up a few semitones. And that's not very dramatic, but it's doing something. Oh yeah, I should point out I'm doing this at 90 BPM, and typically dance and acid and things like that are between 90 and 150, somewhere around there. You get entirely different results based on how fast the notes are playing, and I think it's going to be more beneficial to demonstration here if I keep it at 90, because you're going to be able to hear all of the notes really doing their thing. So the bass, I don't want it to get too crazy because the lead is going to be absolutely nuts. So it's just doing something. It's a little variation. Now I'm going to jump up towards the end of this at 15. I'm going to do the same thing here. So it's basically repeating now twice in the bar. And now I'm going to try to make this one get a little bit more exciting. So now I've got it jumping down an octave and sliding. And what slide does is it makes it go from this C at 14 into this D sharp, but then the D sharp it's going to hold down as it goes into the C again. So it's basically making one really long note that goes zoom. And that accent is punching the cutoff frequency. We'll get into that a little bit more when we get into the lead, but it wasn't sounding good there. I'm going to ditch that. I shut up for a few seconds so you could hear the whole bar there. I like the way that slide is sounding. It's giving it kind of a groove here. And in fact, I'm just going to leave it right there for now and move on to the drums. I'm going to show you like the absolute most generic house pattern, and that that is with the 4 on the floor. This is like true of all dance music, right? It's 4 kick drums on the 1 to 5, and then you throw in a snare on the 5 and the 13, and you turn on the drum machine so you hear that. And now for the closed hats, you basically do 2 and a gap, and then like as soon as you hear that, right? That sounds like so many. You've heard that a million times over, I assure you. So we do this little pattern here, and it's important to listen to your hats as you're putting them in, because this is how the listener is going to be perceiving time in your song here. So I'm giving the just a very sort of standard. It's very mellow, but it's giving them kind of this like trancey sort of repetitive thing. And now throw in open hats on the open spots that we had. So that would be this and this. So in this instance at 90 BPM, me doing this is just kind of lazy, but it's absolutely vital when you're getting into really fast BPM that you don't get too crazy with your drums, because it's just going to be overpowering. It's just going to be like, you know. So since we are working at a lower BPM though, I can get creative with it. So I'm actually going to clear out everything I've done here. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, but my mom's family is Black Irish. So I lay down the funk. Like, I absolutely just love to play with these. People are saying that, you know, drum machines have no soul, and I think it's all in the user. I will start off with a snare in the traditional spot, and that's about the last thing that I'm going to be doing that's traditional. I want to keep in mind some of the traditional expectations so I can play with those, but I'm not going to follow them as a rule. So you notice that on this, when you've got a orange note, it's soft. That's how you put in accents on the 909 machine here. So with the red note, we get a different result. And you can play with that as I'm right here, where it's doing this kind of roll with the accent off a beat. So it's a little bit more funky than it would be using the traditional method. For the hats, I just listen to what's going on. You know, I'll start off with the same sort of basic idea. Actually, I don't like that. Oh, you know what? Let's just remember another tip that I like to play with. Putting the open hat on the snare. Wherever you've got the heavy snare hit. But you hear how that sounds a little off now? That's what I was talking about with the hats being really important to the timing of your song. So with this on the 14 rather than the 13, it's very obviously wrong. And like you gotta really kind of listen to it and try to figure out a way to make that work. I could just put it over here. That's the safe option. Let me see if I can find a better place for it. Oh, you know what? That's kind of working, because that's the end of that snare roll. We try with that with an accent. Yeah. All right. So it's not any huge, great kind of Beethoven music theory kind of thing that's going on here. It's just playing around with these 16 buttons in different ways and listening. Like, that's the key here, is just listening to what works. So now with the open hat done, let me go back into the closed hats. And so I got that closed hat right here, and you don't want the closed hats and the open hats to be on the same note. So let me try throwing stuff around it. settings, I'm looking at the spacing. Like, this is why it's got these numbers here, is you can actually look at it and think about the relationship of the spacing. So I actually could get away with adding in another there, and possibly moving it over here. No, it was definitely better over here. It's just a matter of listening to it, right? All right, let's move on from the drums into the lead. And this is where things get really interesting. So I've got it right now. It's just loaded up with a whole bunch of Fs. And before I get going at all, I want to make sure that I get the cutoff and resonance all set up so that it's giving me the acid sound. So got to get some resonance in there. And what we're trying to accomplish here is to play around with the resonance in a really creative way. So the resonance is kind of peaking whatever frequency the cutoff's at. And the cutoff is being changed by the envelope modulation. So with a lot of it, it's pushing it way up, and with a little bit, it's not pushing it up as much. But it is actually pushing it up some, as you'll hear as I crank up the decay. You hear how that's different? Even though the envelope mod is zeroed out, it's still pushing it up a little bit, and you can play with that. So let me get this sounding kind of acidy. All right, I'm doing this as a gentle kind of squelch for people that aren't into acid. That distortion immediately kicks in, right? Let me actually calm that down a little bit. Quite a lot of it, because it's giving the resonance a lot of character. As you see, if I reduce the cutoff entirely, see, that's all distortion that we're hearing there. So that's about as low as I want the distortion to go, or else it loses that character. Alright, so we got our drums. And now I'm going to listen to what I've done with the bass and apply some of the characteristics. We've only made a few changes to the bass. I'm going to apply some of those characteristics to the lead now, so that the lead follows along with what the bass is doing. So I know on the 6, 7. It was the 7. I threw it up a few semitones. So let me try that now. That sounds pretty good. It's going with it. You hear both the bass and the lead. Let me separate them a little bit so you hear that better. Over to the 15. Actually, on this, instead of setting it up a few semitones, I was actually throwing it up 3. I'm going to take it down 2. And once again, putting in a slide here. And I wasn't playing with the up and down octave range selector very much in the bass line, but I'm going to do that a lot on the lead because I want it to have lots of different stuff going on here. So let me start off by throwing this down. I believe I was doing down on, yeah, listen to that. Like, that's what we want, right? Because we're now sliding down in this hard kind of gritty way that the resonance is really catching, and which the distortion is then in turn catching and making beautiful acidy crunch. So that's like the basic bare minimum that we got right there, right? So I'm gonna save that as pattern 1 and copy now into pattern 2, and I'm gonna work on that instead. So I'm gonna add in some variation, and I'm million ways you can go about this. I'm particularly inclined to making the beginning of the bar sound kind of punchy to let you know that hey, this is it, this is happening. So I'm going to try dropping that down a few notes, but then up an octave. That's alright, let's see what I can do from there. You hear how just naturally funky that is, right? Like that is kind of the basic idea that they had in mind for this thing when they were designing all these accents and slides and stuff. But it never really caught on in that regard because it doesn't sound like an actual bass machine. So for making an actual bass guitar or whatever, so it sucks for that, but it's awesome for screwing around with resonances and cutoffs. Now, if I was going to be doing this like as a serious thing, I'd probably fill up all 8 patterns with some slight variation, but instead I'm just work with these 2 and make this one sound a little bit more interesting. And there's a lot of ways that you can approach this. Like even just going up and down in octave ranges on the same notes can be pretty interesting. So let's see, on 5, remember we have nothing happening with the bass. That's when our kick comes in. I want to make that go down. So it's basically acting as a kind of a second low kick punch thing. And you hear it sounds like it belongs with everything else that's going on here. It's a little hard to hear exactly what's going on with all this. Let me see, it's a gentle kind of thing that's going on in there. You can't really hear any sort of dramatic difference, but it's in there. I really like slides. I'm gonna throw in another one here. That was one too many slides. All right. Gonna instead take this. We're at the second beat. I'm going to add a little variation after this low F. Alright, so that sounds a little dorky, right? As simple as that. I just lower the octave on the one note that I added. Like I'm doing this very methodically, right? Like I'm only adding one change, and I listen to it, then I make a change based on what I've heard. So without this, that sounds just really like dorky's the only word I can think of to describe that. But as soon as I throw in a down, it sounds like it belongs with everything else that we're doing. In fact, let me jump over now into 8, and I want to drop it back down from there. That's not working so well. Let me try another slide here. Yeah, that's not working because I've got another down there. Let me try an up. So the accent's like really punchy, right? Because it's just cranking up that cutoff. But I think it's a little too obnoxious. At least there with that slide. No, I've tried so many different variations, none of them are working. I'm gonna try a different note altogether. Alright, you see, sometimes you get stumped, you play around with it, you're listening to that one change that you made and you're working from that, so you get the basic idea. It's just working through each and every single step like this. And rather than dragging this out for half an hour, I'm going to instead show you some tips for actually playing this stuff. So there are people who say, and perhaps they're right, that acid is dead. Like it's music of the 90s, it belongs to the 90s. But I think that this is ready for a resurgence because it has the same sort of emphasis on really abrasive sounds that are becoming popular now. Like, we're past dubstep, right? Now even pop music is doing all kinds of really aggressive sounds with additive synthesis and all this other stuff. And I think that acid deserves another shot because this is a much more lively sort of thing because you play it. It's not heavily quantized automation. Like, I never automate any parameters at all. If it's got a knob, I'm playing with the knob. The only thing I automate is notes. And let me fuck up here to show you an example of something that you might encounter. Okay, so you're listening as the decay. The decay is too short and it's pumping up the envelope. So it's giving you this really percussive sort of sound, and that does not sound good. So if this ever happens, there's a quick solution. Dramatically raise the cutoff. Because what was happening was the envelope mod's really high and it's cranking it way up. But if you've got the cutoff brought up, it has less room to go. So it's not as dramatic when it comes spiking back down on that short decay. So you just quickly raise the cutoff because this isn't jazz. You can't just keep making the same fuck ups and call it music. You gotta listen to this. That's what this is all about. It's like really listening to it and playing around with these knobs. And when things start to get kind of boring and repetitive, that's when you switch patterns, or you start to really crank the resonance. Like right now, I've been playing this like this. That's weak. That's just like not a lot of resonance at all. But you can get really grungy and heavy. I just changed one knob by this much, and that's already made such a huge difference to the sound, right? It's all happening, like you're feeling the music, you're living the music. It's awesome. I really dig this. I hope that you've enjoyed this. Thank you very much to all my Patreon patrons for making this possible. I really enjoy doing these. Take it easy. And a great thing that you can do with all these kinds of programs is set mute groups. So if I go back into the program settings for this and enter the parameters, these are my hats. If I set them to a mute group, when one of these triggers, it's going to cause the other one to silence, so they won't overlap. So that it's like a real hi-hat scenario where you can't have an open hat and a closed hat sound because that's a physical drum thing that just can't happen. I want to throw in a supercharger, which you could just throw a whole bunch of like a unison wave kind of thing at it. But what I'm going to use this for is to add a sub bass. And you can set it to either 2 octaves or 1. I'm just giving it 1, and I don't want any detune. All right, it's already sounding like the basis is something epic, but of course, we need to get some reverb on this. Let's go large.